Okay. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to the Sceptical Lefties again, where thank God we've got absolutely nothing to talk about whatsoever.
Absolutely zero to talk about. Oh, except for the incredible eye test road trip that Dominic Cummings took.
Yes.
All the way to Durham when he absolutely should not have done. Oh, and then there was this other little insignificant thing about some, another black guy has been brutally murdered by the police.
The United States of America has entered into a pre-revolutionary state, everyone. Which fills us with both excitement and horror about what may happen. And at the moment, it does seem to be more on the horror side rather than the excitement side.
Absolutely. The one way, of course, that you absolutely combat violence is with more violence, it seems. This great idea that they've had about let's all riot. Now, I understand that there is obviously a place for protest. But I will never condone violence. I mean, don't get me wrong. We've all engaged in violence at one time or another. It's a necessary evil, especially when you're in school. Because some fuckers need putting in their place. But in the cold light of day, as adults, if you're going around and using it as an excuse to smash things and loot, then then fuck you.
Well, I think we might talk about this later in the episode because I've got some thoughts on this, and there is a way in which I think we can knit this together with a lot of my thoughts on Dominic Cummings. Because,
right, okay.
Normally, we do like a laugh on this podcast and things, but it's worth actually going in detail into what Dominic Cummings actually believes, because it would explain a lot about how, we've kind of got to this point. I know it's happening in America, but it's kind of, something like this could potentially happen in this country. We don't know what that spark is, that one little thing which may kick off.
Well, if you remember, not too long back, we had the riots in Tottenham. Was it a young fellow by the name of Mark Duggan, I believe his name was? He was
Mark
shot.
Duggan was killed with an absolute beast of a weapon.
Yes.
And that's what kicked off the 2011 London riots.
But, and then you actually, you look a little deeper and you find out that Mark Duggan wasn't exactly the nicest person that ever existed. Did he deserve to be shot? That's a different question altogether. But, he supposedly, he may not have actually had a weapon on him at the time, but he did actually have a weapon, and then had disposed of it just before the fatal incident. Police have got to go on that assumption, haven't they? Anyway, we'll get into that. We will get into the morality of the police in America. Anyway, so we will kick off with the things a little closer to home with Dominic Cummings, a man who really he's sort of become the sort of evil puppet master of British politics, and specifically
a kind of Rasputin for Guardian readers, really.
He kind of is he is a bit like Rasputin, yes. Although I imagine he probably doesn't have a massive cock like Rasputin has. And if you don't believe me, Google it, because some fucker preserved it.
It's going a bit far.
So it was obviously an important cock.
No, but this whole Dominic Cummings episode is very instructive, because it's very instructive of how the government thinks about its own policy making, and it reveals the phenomenal arrogance of Dominic Cummings. I mean, there's a tiny clause in the government's lockdown guidelines, and I think it's clause 4 or something, the emergency clause, which gives certain parents.
I remember clause 4 well. Sorry,
there is a small clause in the government's lockdown guidance which would allow for parents to nominally break the lockdown rules in exceptional childcare crises. So if you had complicated childcare arrangements and a crisis arose, you may be able to break it as long as you had that child's interests at heart.
That sounds a bit vague.
But it is vague, which is the part of the problem. But I can understand that, you know, parents on, say, low incomes, and if getting childcare cover wasn't easy, I suppose that you know, you have to do what's in the interest of the child, and sometimes that may mean breaking other lockdown rules. But by no stretch of the imagination could what Dominic Cummings did be remotely considered to be within the spirit of the lockdown guidelines. I mean, many parents have childcare problems. They don't drive 200 miles across the whole country to solve them.
No, they don't.
The long and the short of it is,
if you have to drive over 200 miles to someone who would potentially help you, then quite frankly, you're probably a bit of a cunt.
Yeah.
If you've got no one in your immediate vicinity
Yeah.
that you can turn to for help,
Yeah.
that you have to go running to mummy and daddy.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, the long and the short of it is, in reality, Dominic Cummings and his wife just wanted to isolate in County Durham as opposed to London. I mean, that's the long and the short of it, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Just in case any of the one listener, hello Jake.
Hi Jake. Yeah.
Just in case anyone who's been living under a rock, just to put it into, just to put some flesh on the bones here. Basically, the TLDR version is that Dominic Cummings, who is the chief advisor to Boris Johnson, his wife contracted COVID-19. He then rushed home to quote unquote care for her. Then immediately returned to work. I think like the next day or something. Which you know, again, he's broken the isolation rule there. Then he actually contracts COVID-19 himself.
Yeah.
And then decides, in order to shield his kid or something, he basically puts everyone in the car, you know, himself, his wife, and his 4-year-old child, in the car, and they drive up to their Dominic Cummings' parents' place, which is a large, sprawling estate.
It's a farm in County Durham.
Yeah, with a rather grandiose.
One imagines a cottage on the side of it. I've actually, I won't tell you how I know this, but
fair enough.
I've been to farms on County Durham in the past. I've had friends of mine who've lived on them, and they're quite big, and you can imagine. And there's quite plausible that there's a cottage on the side of it, and so I believe it's true, which is what makes me think that basically what they were doing is they were self-isolating in a cottage surrounded by this farm.
But then again,
but
this immediately raises the question: why couldn't he have just isolated in his, I assume, some sort of ridiculously overpriced flat in London?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
Well, the difference is 260 miles that would have absolutely necessitated at least one stop throughout that entire journey. I think if you're driving London to County Durham, that's at least a 5-hour trip, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
You know, there is just no way that anyone's going to do a 5-hour touch non-stop. Not with a 4-year-old on board. You know, the poor wee guy's got to pee sometime. Yeah. You know, and so do the adults. You know, and the car's going to need fuel. So, so he's getting out. He's obviously, you know, potentially exposing other people to this risk. And then, a little while later, Dominic Cummings, apparently he was suffering with COVID-19 symptoms for around 10 days. And supposedly, it turns out that that his eyesight was a little bit off, like blurry or something. And he was slowly getting better. And then, in his own words, or paraphrasing his own words, him and his wife decided to go for a, quote, short drive, unquote, to basically see if his eyesight was good enough for them to drive back home.
Yeah, because driving 30 miles in one direction and 30 miles back is exactly the way that anyone would test their eyesight.
Absolutely. I've heard there's actually a really good opticians in. He basically ended up in a place called Barnard Castle, which is right up in the Pennines. It's a lovely place, actually. Anyone who wishes to test their eyesight should absolutely go to Barnard Castle. What?
That, don't worry. That's just.
Yeah. Never mind. Okay,
Yeah.
that's an odd noise there.
Yeah.
Viewers in the north may be experiencing some technical difficulties.
Yeah, but I think basically, I can't remember what I was going to think now. I think Dominic Cummings. Do you? I mean, this gives you some idea of what an utter charlatan he is. Do you realise that the day that Cummings and his wife took that trip to Barnard Castle, also, by amazing coincidence, was also Dominic Cummings' wife's birthday?
Indeed, and I heard tell, I can't remember where I read it, but I think it was his mother's birthday when they actually went to Durham.
Yeah.
Now, I would have to see a citation, but I did read that somewhere.
Yeah.
It's probably on Faceache, so you take that with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
However, that's a big red flag right there.
Yeah.
And another red flag that's quite interesting, with all this coronavirus, the efforts to combat it going on, and of course the massive scrabble at the moment for a working vaccine for COVID-19. It just so happens that a large pharmaceutical company, GlaxoSmithKline, is headquartered at Barnard Castle.
Is it? Yeah.
It is. So one has to wonder as to his intentions.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing's an absolute complete joke. And I said to you before, it's completely undermined the whole lockdown policy anyway, because at the moment as it stands, you can't, if people in relationships can't see each other if they are living in two households, which is a large number of people.
Indeed, I myself, I believe you yourself, we've not seen our partners in the flesh. Since lockdown began, and it's taking quite a toll. I think I've got repetitive strain injury in my arm.
TMI, anyways. A bit of TMI there for it. That's like, no, but and if you are prohibited from seeing your partner when you're not symptomatizing or showing any symptoms of coronavirus at all, and you are showing symptoms of coronavirus, and you can travel across the whole country and not get in any trouble with the authorities in it at all, you're basically undermining the whole lockdown. And there's a very, very, and I will knit this in later when we talk about Dominic Cummings' ideas. I think the other thing we have to talk about is the role of the police here, because twice in very short succession, a senior people at the heart of government, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, have been investigated by the police, and both times the police have given them a blank check or given them the benefit of the doubt on both occasions. And you have to wonder, is the government exerting any muscle on the police? Just to tell you what these are. So the first thing is Dominic Cummings, which we've just talked about, and the fact that the police did look at the Cummings case. They did, I believe, have a chat to him. And
one or two senior policemen did actually call for the matter to be taken further. Yeah,
but somehow the police, he was given a stiff, stern talking to, but nothing ever happened. But the other thing that happened very recently, and this was interestingly, because this was buried on the day that it was announced the shops were reopening, I think. This was the Jennifer Arcuri case.
Oh yes.
Okay, so Jennifer Arcuri was is an American entrepreneur, who has what can be described as a close friendship with Boris Johnson. Now, She also has a.
Does that
she's
mean he
also
was shagging her?
well. I have to be careful about libel laws, but you know, allegedly, we have to say that he wasn't because you know we don't have any evidence for that. But basically, Jennifer Arcuri, as far from being an American, she's also a pole dancer, and apparently Boris Johnson gave her some money to start for her to start a business, but this for some reason didn't contravene the laws, the
lockdown laws.
No. I'm talking about the. It's different kind of laws. It's about the misappropriation of a public office laws.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Because obviously that would be corrupt because you can't give public money to people you're shagging. But it was slipped out of it. And it slipped out of it because there's no evidence that he was actually shagging Jennifer Arcuri, despite the fact that he went for business meetings in the middle of the day in her house. Because that's the kind of thing that you regularly do when you're giving public sector contracts to.
Absolutely, you go and see a stripper.
Yeah.
And you know, bit of T&E, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, presumably can't produce any minutes of these business meetings and things.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, the thing is,
despite the fact
find a point on it, prostitution is in and of itself a business. So,
yeah,
but that's alleged. That's totally alleged.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the fact that there's a photograph of Jennifer Arcuri at, I think it's the launch of her business actually. For those of you who don't know, when Jennifer Arcuri eventually launched her business, she held a party and was what Boris Johnson was invited to give an amusing speech and whatever. And there's a photograph of her in front of a cake, and on the cake are little kind of like marzipan Boris Johnson figure, and she's got the marzipan Boris Johnson figure on this spoon and eating it, and this was put on Twitter, and they're saying like, I'm having the London mayor and things like that, which obviously is absolutely no indication whatsoever that it may be more of a close friendship, you know. I mean, you know, but it's very interesting. But for somehow, despite all of this, and despite the fact that Boris is a known philanderer, who has had so many love children, no one actually knows whether. I mean, it's not.
He must shit himself on Father's Day.
Yeah. I mean, he must the
postman gets his bad back because of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's his latest child with Carrie Simmons is conceivable his 8th child. I mean, it's not officially, it's about his 6th, but there's a rumour that his latest child is his 8th children, and he's had numerous affairs with outside all of his previous marriages. All of his ex-wives were cheated on at some point during their marriage to Boris Johnson. Now, obviously, none of this is evidence that he's actually done anything wrong, but twice now the police...
morally.
Twice now the police have investigated senior members of the government, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, and both times, despite overwhelming evidence, or shall we say, despite a large amount of circumstantial evidence, they haven't gone any further. And you do wonder exactly how much political muscle is being exerted on the police, you know. Yeah. Anyway,
and considering as far as Dominic Cummings' road trip is concerned, he hasn't denied it. In fact, he's pretty much fessed up to it. So that's a confession right there.
Well, I mean, the thing is, he's not been consistent, to say the least. I mean, the excuses kept on changing and changing and changing. Yeah,
and indeed, he's sort of, was it? We were just watching the most recent episode of Have I Got News for You, and I think Ian Hislop said something to the effect of, it's interesting how what he's done seemingly is to take what we already know and then, you know, sort of retroactively construct a story around it. And then completely fails with a, you know, if he'd just held his hands up and said, yeah, I did break the rules, I'm sorry, I'll take my punishment on the chin, because it's only a fucking fine. I'm sure he can afford
I'm sure he can afford it. I mean, if he's working for the government at that level, he can afford a
Yeah, I'm pretty certain he can spare a few quid. You know, if we can certainly afford the fuel from London to Durham, for example. And then, I've lost my train of thought there.
We were talking about how.
He comes out with this complete non-apology where he basically just says, "I'm following my parental instinct." Oh no, but it was Boris who defended him and said he's you know, following his parental instinct, which realistically, well, if you can use that as an excuse, well, that opens the floor up to everyone else, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And indeed, lots of people now are basically flouting the lockdown rules, and they're just basically saying, well, you know, if good old Dom can get away with it, then why the fuck can't I?
Yeah. Well,
you know, and this completely undermines the entire process, and it basically pretty much guarantees that we will get a second wave of the virus, and that lots of people, you know, lots more people are going to die.
I think, I think so. I mean, that is the worst case scenario. Is that the second wave?
But it is a reasonable assumption.
But what I think, I'm going to talk a bit now about Dominic Cummings and his ideas and what he believes in. Because it's a bit vague actually what he believes in. But I will say this: if a second wave happens, what the Conservative Party will do is they will blame people for breaking the lockdown, and they won't blame the government for fucking it up. So they will say, and I saw it on Twitter, there was some tosser in the Tory, a junior minister I think, saying if a second wave happens, don't blame the government, underneath a photograph of enormous crowds of people gathering in a park somewhere. And you may very well say that they shouldn't be doing that, but equally governments are supposed to show leadership on the issue, and this, considering the government's handling of the situation has been so woeful, ultimately the buck stops with the government, you know.
The buck always stops with the government.
And you know, but it's the Tory mentality. It's the same mentality which with which they drive draconian cuts to the welfare benefit system.
And if you think they've been bad before, just you fucking wait till they try and get their money back for what they've spent on this furlough scheme and everything else.
And they will, you know, but they will blame selfish individuals, you know, for everything that happens next.
I'd like them to blame the previous government.
Yeah.
Fucking Theresa May. At least now she's been dethroned as worst PM.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Our Prime Ministers keep on getting worse, you know.
Well, Tory ones do.
Yeah. But anyway, so Dominic Cummings. So for those of you that don't know, the first time that anyone had ever heard of Dominic Cummings outside of the Westminster bubble was from a TV drama called Brexit: The Untold Story, which was written by a playwright called James Graham and went out on Channel 4. It's quite enjoyable, if a bit silly programme, but it's a good watch in its own right. So
is it a satirical look?
No, this is a proper drama.
Okay.
It's got this daft side to it, but it's actually quite serious in parts. So it's worth watching. It's an enjoyable watch. James Graham also wrote Quiz about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's kind of tonally the same, a sort of serious drama with bits of humour in it. So this was the story of the Brexit referendum told but through the eyes of Dominic Cummings, who was one of the main architects of the Leave voters. And Dominic Cummings is presented in that programme as being a Svengali-like figure, someone who actually doesn't care about elected politics, but he does care about ideas and reshaping politics in his own image. Now, there's the only bit about which this image is true, I think, is about Dominic Cummings' enormous ego. A curiously slightly fragile ego, actually, and his own sense of self-importance and intellectual vanity. the rest of it, I think, is basically Cummings talking, Cummings thinking. So Cummings, the most significant thing to understand Dominic Cummings, you've got to understand one essential fact, is that he's not exactly he's not a member of the Conservative Party.
No,
he's not, despite the fact that he's worked with very senior Conservatives, and his ideas inform a lot of the current Conservative government. Dominic Cummings is not a member of the Conservative Party. What he's interested in is gaming things, and so Dominic Cummings sees the Brexit referendum happening, and he thinks, "I'll game it." Okay, his vision is of a kind of a world run by very efficient, undemocratic technocrats. And a lot of his thing is the blog. He does his blog where he puts all his ideas into it, and you just read it for a bit and you realise what complete and utter tosh it really is. It's basically a lot of very, very right-wing, free market, libertarian nonsense, washed down with this veneer of scientific credibility. So he's really keen on things like evolutionary biology, genetics, eugenics and things like that. Dominic Cummings basically believes that everything.
There is something interesting because yes, he's been criticised for a sort of taking a kind of eugenicist stance. Obviously, eugenics is a very loaded ideology, especially when obviously the Second World War and the Holocaust is still very much in living memory. However, I mean, playing devil's advocate, the one thing that people that people need to realise about eugenics is that in and of itself, it is an ideology that works in practice.
Really?
And in what I mean is because it's a bit of a detachment, because, like, for example, if you are breeding cattle, and you want one that makes more milk, then in order to produce the milk cow, for example, the Holstein, the Friesian, whatever, they in order to produce that, they had to engage in the act of eugenics, breeding for certain traits. But of course, people only generally tend to focus on the sort of more insidious side of it, where it's like, you are not the master race.
Can I just say that I'm not advocating eugenics.
No. I mean,
Yeah.
neither am I. But I'm just saying, what I am saying is that not all of the nebulous term eugenics is as bad as it sounds.
Well, in Dominic Cummings' world,
yes.
Governments in history progress by a small number of very, very bright people. So Dominic Cummings has taken these ideas and they've informed a lot of Michael Gove's thinking about education, for example. So Dominic Cummings
has thinking.
Dominic Cummings thinks that basically working class people, youngsters, shouldn't be educated because poor people are less clever, things like that.
Oh, yes.
So
that's fantastic, isn't it? What a great worldview, I suppose. Also, I suppose that he just wants us intelligent enough to operate the machinery, but not too intelligent as to question why.
Yeah, and so Dominic Cummings, a lot of these theories is that you don't have to spread education horizontally across the community and across the country. You just have to basically, if you meet certain scientific standards, you can progress to higher education and to run government and to project manage things. And if you don't, that's enough for you. And you realise, and to do this, he weaves together a very, very generalized interpretation of lots of philosophers and things. But when you get down to it, you realize it's all bollocks. And he's basically like Warren Buffett, who's developed a facility for just being very, very generalizing in a lot of his thinking. Is actually, I mean, in Dominic Cummings' world, the model is sort of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Now, Silicon, which actually doesn't make him that different, really, from a lot of other kind of conventional, inverted commas, Westminster thinkers. I mean, in that sense, Dominic Cummings is not much more unconventional in his beliefs of what constitutes good government than people in the David Cameron, Nick Clegg coalition, or the Obama administration, or New Labour, or any of these kind of very mainstream conventional governments. It's just that Dominic Cummings is just better at blagging this pseudo-intellectual veneer. I mean, the Silicon Valley is interesting because it rests on massive financial corruption. So like organizations like Google and Amazon, they're essentially tax dodging companies.
Yeah,
They basically steal revenue from things that should belong to the American people, and I suppose it's a lot true for a lot of tech companies in this country as well.
Yes.
They just basically steal revenue that belongs to you and me. But Dominic Cummings admires them, and a lot of technocrats admire them for the reasons that they just innovate, in inverted commas, and get things done, get X done.
Get Brexit done.
Yeah. So for Dominic Cummings, this is a perfect model for government, because you don't have pesky things like elections getting in the way. I mean, from Dominic Cummings' point of view, elections get in the way of the smooth running of the market. And the other things from Dominic Cummings' point of view that is troublesome about elections is that all the people who you dismiss as being thick on account of their bad genes also turn up to make their displeasure known at the ballot box, unless you can effectively corral them to vote for the Tory party.
Which,
he can do very successfully.
It worked, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, he can do it very successfully, but you don't have to be a genius to do that.
No.
It's like,
Well, you don't. You clearly don't, because there was no genius that went into the idea of get Brexit done.
Yeah.
I mean, like you say, we both voted Leave, but at the same time, not Leave at any cost.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the 2019 election was an anti-politics election.
Yes.
It was the Conservative Party won it through anti-politics, not politics. And they basically said, vote for us. You won't have to think about politics for another 4 years. Vote for us. We'll get all these politicians out of your way. Vote for us. We'll get what you want through Parliament, and you won't have to think about politics at least until another election rolls along. You won't have to be bothered by things like parliaments and elections and politicians ever again. And they voted for it, and now, 2 months after the election, they've got a massive systemic crisis which actually requires politicians to solve it. And one of the things about coronavirus, it's just revealed how utterly inadequate Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings are to solving these crises.
It is interesting because Dominic Cummings, he wields a lot of power, despite his job description not giving him that power. Well,
he's never been elected to anything by anyone.
No,
but which is another aspect which makes his what he's doing in the government so reprehensible. Because this man has taken life or death decisions. If we accept the view that Dominic Cummings is basically shaping the government's attitude to coronavirus.
Well, if he has the ear of Boris, then whose opinion does he hear first? Dominic sitting in allegedly sitting in at SAGE meetings, which he's not allowed to do. Well, I've heard that he fired that last, didn't he? The I can't remember her name. Sonia Khan. He fired her, despite the fact that that's not his job.
I mean, I've heard it goes even further than that. I've heard it said that Dominic Cummings is actually shaping the entire coronavirus policy to an extent which the science is not. Now that
Well, that's it. I mean, that just goes to prove that we are not, in fact, following the science as was so vehemently claimed.
Yeah.
Because the science was saying, lock the fuck down now.
Yeah. Well, the science was saying, well, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has has the largest number of scientists who are experts in this field and who are really knowledgeable in this field. And the message that came out from them, loud and clear, was test, test, test.
Yes.
And something that's always confused me from the very beginning is the government claims that they haven't been able to produce testing on a mass scale to, say, avoid lockdown or to avoid certain decisions being made. But when you think about it, Prince Charles was tested for coronavirus. Boris Johnson was tested for coronavirus. I presume
Dominic would have been.
I presume the Queen was also tested for coronavirus. I haven't heard that said. But
Probably not, because
one would imagine I don't know how often she sees Prince Charles, but one would imagine if he's got coronavirus, you would think his mum would have got tested for coronavirus as well. You would have thought so. Yeah. But anyway, I could be wrong. But but other thing is, celebrities like Idris Elba got tested for coronavirus. So they're obviously getting these tests from somewhere.
Oh, the common denominator here is money.
Yeah.
All of these people have money.
Yeah.
The rest of us do not.
Yeah, which begs the question is, if very important people in this country are the heart of government and also in the other areas of the Britain's ruling class, like celebrities and things, if they can get tested for coronavirus, who on earth is producing these tests, and why can't they manufacture them for the rest of us? So, and that would appear to undermine the government's claim that it can't produce testing on a mass scale. Anyway, that's just food for thought,
Absolutely, it's interesting. I think realistically, though, Boris's failure to act against Dominic tells me two things: either that he is weak, or that Dominic has some absolutely brilliant photographs of him in some sort of
I don't know.
ridiculously compromising
I've heard
position.
that theory as well. I've heard there's a theory that Dominic Cummings has some dirt on Boris Johnson.
He has to. No one is that bulletproof.
Well, I've heard a rumour. Now, this is just a rumour. There's a rumour going around on social media that Boris Johnson's an alcoholic.
Well, it's not unknown in politics. Look at poor Charles Kennedy.
I know. That is very true. And also, you must remember the number of MPs in the House of Commons who are not what a doctor would describe as functioning alcoholics is vanishingly small.
Really?
Oh, yeah, don't you know this? So, the House of Commons has a drinking culture. There are 17
publicly
bars.
subsidised bars.
There are 17 publicly subsidised bars in the House of Commons. And there was one period in time where there were only a handful of teetotalers. One of them was Tony Benn.
Yeah.
The other one was Ian Paisley. One of them was George Galloway. And I think the other one was Dennis Skinner. They were the only teetotalers in the whole of the House of Commons.
Without wishing to get into stereotyping, Ian Paisley, really?
Well, yeah, he wasn't a drinker. He didn't drink alcohol.
But he's Irish. No, I love the Irish.
Yeah, but he was he was a very, very obviously, he didn't.
Well, actually, no, he would say he was British.
Yeah, he would say he was British.
and he would say no a lot as well.
Yeah, but no, he didn't drink. But I do know. It wouldn't surprise me if Boris Johnson had taken up the bottle, being an MP, as so many have. But I know it's now come to light that. Do you remember during the election, at the start of the election, there was that whole business when Boris Johnson got into a row with Carrie Simons.
Yes, there was domestic incident.
Yeah, there was a domestic incident at Carrie Simons' flat where a neighbour heard them rowing.
Was this when he was still Foreign Sec?
No, this was when he was Prime Minister.
Oh, right.
At the last election. So there was a domestic row at Carrie Simons' flat. However you pronounce the last name, I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
And the neighbours phoned the police, and they went round, and they had some sort of an argument, but that was over apparently it was over a spilled bottle of wine, allegedly.
Could it get any more middle class?
Yeah. I mean that's the thing, but it's one of those. But it's one of those things. It's like the Jennifer Arcuri thing and that Russia report. It's just slipped from public view completely.
Well, it will do, won't it?
Yeah.
Because it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
I think that realistically, you can't necessarily, you all these things that Boris has done.
Yeah.
Is it so much more of a stretch to think that he has done some other bad things as well? No, it isn't. The guy is clearly without morals.
Yeah.
The guy, clearly is just a typical, a typical sort of privileged toff. His middle name De Pfeffel, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the derivation of that is, but it sounds German.
Yeah. So it's actually French, I believe.
Is it?
Yeah.
I didn't.
So but no, the underneath this veneer of this brilliant intellectual mind reshaping politics, Dominic Cummings is just basically any other bigoted libertarian idiot, really. And there's really nothing more to it than that, really. But it wouldn't surprise me if the Dominic Cummings case was very quickly forgotten about, because you know how fickle the Westminster bubble is. I mean,
absolutely.
Bearing in mind, the Tory party promised an investigation into its own party about institutional racism, dropped that commitment, and the media have said nothing about it.
No.
Jennifer Arcuri, nothing. The media said nothing more about it. The Russia report, which we were promised, the media is
you won't hear any of it.
The media have just completely stopped talking about these things. And it wouldn't surprise me if Dominic Cummings was forgotten about. And also the question of whether muscle is being exerted on the police not to investigate the Jennifer Arcuri case any further, not to prosecute Dominic Cummings. Muscle coming from government. I expect there'll be no investigation into that whatsoever. No. And
or if we're promised it won't materialise.
Yeah.
Just in the same way that Theresa May conveniently lost the pedophile peers dossier.
Just sort of lost it, in the way that you do.
Because you would absolutely lose something that important.
And you were former Home Secretary for 5 years, so there's absolutely no way you could know its contents at all.
No, and it further reinforces the fact that basically, and this is what gets me with dicks you see online. They'll come out with this. They'll firstly come out with this absolute fallacy. Oh well, Jeremy Corbyn would have done much worse. You have no fucking proof of that. Well, there's absolute that's just basically straight away you've lost. You've proved you have no fucking argument.
Right. Well, the reality is the Labour Party would have handled this much better
under Corbyn.
Under Corbyn.
Not under Starmer.
No, not under Starmer. He would have been awful, but. Of course Corbyn would have handled this coronavirus much better. I mean, of course he would have. I mean, look at the policies we've had for the last 4 years and at the last election. Investment in the NHS, for one thing. It would have been, that alone would have made a difference. We would have, British broadband, that policy was mocked everywhere, and coronavirus happens and everyone suddenly needs Wi-Fi or broadband, and this and the fact that the Corbyn-led Labour government would have handled this crisis much better is borne out perfectly by the furlough scheme. Now this is actually, for working people, the fact that they've been furloughed has actually saved them a lot of stress and basically stopped mass unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
But the person we have to thank for that is really John McDonnell,
Mm-hmm.
because John McDonnell persuaded the government to furlough people's jobs, and it saved a massive, an enormous number of people claiming unemployment benefit. It saved a lot of people an enormous amount of stress for looking after children and worrying about their jobs. It's potentially saved people's jobs, and
not if you work at Wetherspoons, though.
No, not if you work at Wetherspoons. But look, the effectiveness is proven by the fact that most Tory MPs hate it.
Yeah.
I mean, recently we've heard the knowledge that they all hate furlough.
Of course they do.
And
Of course they do, because it proves them wrong.
Yeah. And also, but the reaction is also revealing from Starmer, because Annalise Dodds and Keir Starmer are absolutely desperate not to be seen as anti-business in any way. So the ludicrous position they've taken towards landlords kind of gives you the fact that, I mean, if Annalise Dodds had been Shadow Chancellor and Keir Starmer leader of the opposition, when those early negotiations between the Labour Party and the Tory government happened, would people have been furloughed? There's a chance they may not have been.
I don't think they would have been. And, and it goes to prove as well, you if you go back and look at every single instance of further development of the COVID crisis, Jeremy was the one calling for the common sense things, the common sense changes.
Well, I think
he was calling for lockdown a lot quicker as well.
I think we said in our Starmer episode, Jeremy Corbyn's remarks on the backbenches have been better opposition than Keir Starmer.
They have.
Because,
he's not going to roll over.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing. I know it always sounds like we give Jeremy a lot of slack, but and it's hard not to. It's hard not to, because he is invariably correct.
Yeah.
He is invariably correct. Whether you like it or not, which a lot of people seemingly don't. But realistically, would you want Starmer as the one forensically?
Well, this is actually, I'm glad you mentioned this, because this brings us on perfectly onto the recent events in America. Because it's becoming clear now that as a leader, Starmer just cannot come out with a simple statement opposing basically anything. He's this incredible ditherer. He just dithers with anything.
It's a classic diplomatic answer.
Yeah.
Basically, a non-answer.
When he's given any example of an open shut case, where surely the instinctive reaction of any Labour leader would be to say, no, this is wrong. These are the people responsible. This is how we would do things differently. He dithers and dithers and dithers, and comes out with something incredibly bland. I mean, it wouldn't be so bad if he came out with something which was forceful and powerful and memorable, but he just comes out with something which is so bland, it's forgettable. And that is demonstrated perfectly by his reaction to the tragic death of Mark Floyd.
Mark Floyd.
Is it Mark Floyd?
Sure. I thought it was. Well, this is the guy.
This is the guy who was killed by the police officer in the United States.
I thought it was a George. You've got me wondering now.
We are recording this quite late.
It's quite late at night. But again, for those of you who've been living under a rock, this young man of African American descent was in the process of being arrested by the police in which city was it? Do we know? That's one thing I haven't actually seen.
Minneapolis.
Oh, Minneapolis, so Minnesota. Yeah. In the course of this attempted arrest, the gentleman in question was pinned to the ground, face down, with several officers restraining him, and one in particular who was basically full on kneeling on his neck, and stifled sort of cries of "Please, I can't breathe. Please stop." You know, that kind of general pleading. Went completely unheard. Now, all of this was captured, as so many things are these days, on a cell phone camera, and it's absolutely, it's just gone viral. It really pretty broken the internet a lot more than Kim Kardashian ever could hope to, with her gigantic ass. But joking aside, obviously this is an incredibly disgusting act, and it's highlighted once again that there are major systemic problems within American law enforcement. However, on balance, for balance, one must point out that it is not an easy job to be an American policeman. However, or police person, if you want to be like that about it. However, that is completely detached from this particular incident, because, having a split second to decide whether you need to take deadly force against someone who is an imminent threat is completely different from someone who is already restrained and under arrest, who didn't appear to actually be resisting. Actually, you don't see him twitching or struggling, and who is basically.
He does say, "I can't breathe."
Yes, but. I mean, but again, I don't want to. I don't want to be I don't want to sound like a dick when I say this. However, that is a very, very common thing to hear when someone is being restrained on the ground.
The key thing is, he didn't pose a threat to those.
No,
officers,
he did not pose an immediate threat to those officers, and they were not in imminent danger of harm, and there is absolutely. The act of compressing someone's neck with pretty much I would say at least 85% of your body weight, as a big strapping policeman, is, it's completely unconscionable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, it's revealing, I think. And this is where I'm going to tie it in with Dominic Cummings and his undemocratic attitudes to elections, to the education system, his bizarre kind of obsession with bogus science and things. Is that? I'll show you how it fits in later. Is that it's revealing that the murder of George Floyd has elicited. Did I say George earlier, John?
No, you said something else.
Okay, well, sorry.
I said George. You said Mark.
Oh, it's very sorry. It's very. We're recording this very, very late. I'm sorry. But the murder of George Floyd has elicited this reaction, and it's not like this is the first example of institutional anti-black racism in American life. Well, certainly within the last 5 years or so.
Even longer than that. I mean, a lot of us will remember the Rodney King case, where again, a young African American man, Rodney King, was beaten to within an inch of his bloody life. Thankfully, he did survive. I was actually under the impression that he was killed, but I looked it up and he wasn't. But I imagine in the immediate aftermath, he probably wishes he was, because it was very brutal. They were absolutely setting about him with batons. It was a disgusting thing to watch. But again, that was captured on camera.
Well, there's another. I don't know if you're aware of this, but around about the same time as the Rodney King episode happened, there was another example of anti-black racism on the part of not only the police but also the legal system. So in Los Angeles, maybe about a year after Rodney King or a year before. It's roughly around the same time. There was a black man was shot at point blank range by a shop owner, and it went on trial for murder, and the jury just let him off, despite shooting it in man in the face. But so this is, I mean, and we can connect it to Rodney King, that episode, and there's been numerous.
There'll be more nuance to that particular case you just mentioned, I'm sure.
Well, I'll try and find it. I can't remember it. I saw it on a documentary a long time ago.
Because
so
let's not forget that the laws governing deadly force, or use of deadly force by a private citizen in America, are obviously a heck of a lot more loose than ours here in the UK. Now, in the UK, you are only permitted to use quote unquote reasonable force, which you can determine or interpret to be pretty much you meet fire with fire. That doesn't mean that if someone brings a knife to if someone brings a knife and you use a gun, that's unreasonable force.
But I think
that's an example there.
The reason George Floyd's death has seen this reaction is because the last 5 years there's been a huge emphasis on the murder of young black men in particular.
Ferguson, Missouri being the fantastic example. That's fantastic. It's not a bad word, but
another
word.
Another example of it. And I was stitching this all to my head. I was thinking, well, why has George Floyd's murder resulted in this explosion across the United States, and not the previous, most recent murders of young black men? And I think it's maybe this, is that the whole world is depressed at the moment, right, with coronavirus and everything, and in the last 5 years we've seen grassroots democratic egalitarian movements destroyed by the establishment organs working in concert with each other. So we've and it's worth remembering that the biggest family in the Democratic Party are the Clintons.
Yes.
And it's worth remembering that Bill Clinton, when he was president, massively expanded the number of black men in prison. I mean, so for example...
Yes, because I think Clinton introduced the idea of... No, is it Clinton or Reagan? I can't remember. That they introduced the concept of mandatory minimums.
I don't know anything about mandatory minimums.
Oh, mandatory minimum is terrible. It's a absolutely fucking terrible policy where, there's been people who were busted with a relatively small amount of weed, but were like given 30 years. That's not the direct thing, but if you want to, anyone who wanted information on this, John Oliver, the British comedian who now has an American late night show, he did a great piece on mandatory minimums and used a few examples, and there were nothing offences, but because there was this mandatory minimum sentence, the judge's hand was forced. Even the judges who sentenced some of the people featured in his piece, there was one case where even the judge who sentenced him was like, "This is ridiculous."
I mean, I think we're on the right lines. I don't know if mandatory minimums is a different thing from the 1994 crime bill.
Pass.
It passed, but it sounds to me very similar pieces of legislation. So if it wasn't Bill Clinton that introduced mandatory minimums and it was Reagan, it seems to me, looking at what else Bill Clinton passed into law, it sounds like that Reagan and Bill Clinton are very similar, introduced very similar pieces of legislation,
despite the fact that they actually come from different sides of the floor.
But the thing that I'm talking about is the 1994 crime bill, which introduced this concept of 3 strikes.
Yes, the 3 strike rule.
The 3 strike rule. And this idea was that it was going to reduce the crime bill by introducing a 3 strikes law. So if you got into trouble with the law 3 times, you were banged up in jail,
Yeah.
and it was for life, I believe.
It was certainly a very heavy sentence.
Yeah.
On that first
and so
crime.
this is resulted in basically that this 1994 crime bill basically resulted in the mass incarceration of young black men, basically, and women, but it does seem to be reported as more men than women.
Yes.
So, and often on very minor cases like carrying a bit of weed around them, but this resulted in people people were carrying weed 3 times, and they were banged up for life, and it's been a disaster for the black population.
And certainly those examples would have probably only been, like one or 2 fucking joints worth.
Yeah.
Personal use basically.
Yeah.
But
And
of course,
you're black in America. You've got enough problems with inequality and unemployment, and you're getting banged up for life in prison. And I read an astonishing statistic that 1 in 3 black people in the United States of America have some contact with the criminal justice system. 1 in 3. So 1 in 3 black people in America are either on probation, going to prison, or imprisoned at any one time.
Yes,
1 in 3. And
that doesn't surprise me.
And the Clintons effectively made this worse by mass incarcerating huge amounts of the black population on trivial matters, basically to appease the law and order nuts who traditionally vote Republican.
Absolutely, and even even when marijuana was made illegal in the US, it disproportionately affected African Americans anyway. And it's interesting actually, because I remember watching a documentary on marijuana in America, and it turns out that the main reason that was actually made illegal. This is a little bit of a tangent, but the main reason it was made illegal is because basically marijuana or hemp and cannabis, the actual plant, is a bloody useful thing. It can be made into so many different things.
Cannabis heals an enormous number of physical illnesses,
yes,
like testicular cancer, for example.
Yes, I don't think the cancer benefits were necessarily known at the time, because this was quite a few decades ago now. I think this was in between the world wars. But it was actually the biggest pushers were the logging industry, because you can make some damn good paper out of hemp. But it was the logging industry and lumber in general that pushed massively and made up a lot of shit about it. Threw a lot of shit at the fan about how bad weed was, and that plus obviously a number of other issues is what led to it being declared illegal. I think it's a Schedule 2, no, it's Schedule 1 drug, isn't it? Weed in America, for the most part. Although that has changed now.
In Britain, do you know which political giant, which political colossus we have to thank for, who managed to upgrade cannabis from a grade C drug to a grade B drug? Do you know which political giant we have to responsible?
Political giant. I'm guessing some sarcasm. Go on.
Alan Johnson.
Oh, fuck off.
No exaggeration.
Alan fucking Johnson.
He was the Home Secretary, which reclassified weed as a Class B drug.
Because it was originally declassified, wasn't it?
He did this in the first decade of the 20th century. This 21st century. Sorry, he would be very, very old, old man. No, but Alan Johnson reclassified cannabis.
Because it had been downgraded to a Class C, hadn't it? It was a B, and then it was declassified to a C, and then it got put back up to B again.
But this just shows you. I will get back onto George Floyd and the Clintons and the crime bill and mass incarceration and the recent race riots in America in a minute. I just want to finish off this tangent.
Yes, please do.
We never miss an opportunity to kick this dreadful charlatan in the balls, do we?
I certainly wouldn't.
So listen, Alan Johnson, Professor David Nutt was the senior drugs advisor, advising the government on its drugs policy. Professor David Nutt questioned the reclassification of cannabis, and Alan Johnson's reaction was to sack David Nutt. And
Brilliant.
But this is utterly ludicrous. First of all, I know no one under the age of 50 who has not smoked weed, or not on the age of 40. Maybe one or two very, very morally aesthetic people, but basically no one.
No, I mean, I myself, have been known to partake. I absolutely, I see it as no different to smoking tobacco.
I see smoke. I mean, I see no difference in smoking weed than smoking cigarettes. But
I mean, they're all and alcohol. They're all, and caffeine. Caffeine is completely unregulated, and yet it is one of the most addictive psychoactive drugs out there.
Yeah, but this was in 2009. I mean, it does make you wonder how on earth the Labour Party or New Labour thought that it could appeal to anyone under the age of 30 if they were reclassifying cannabis as a Class B drug, which presumably would require stiffer prison sentences for possession and dealing. If that's what they were doing in 2009, it makes you wonder what their long-term strategy was for creating new generations of Labour voters, because that is not going to go fucking down like a sack of shit with anyone under the age of 40.
And for context, a B classification is in the same group as amphetamines and ketamine. Two obviously much worse things.
We're agreed. But Alan Johnson, basically a horrendous, awful, terrible politician. But the reason now why we all mention this in the context of George Floyd is like this. The Clintons are the most powerful family within the Democratic Party, and for the last 5 years they've worked in concert with business and the media to destroy the Bernie Sanders campaign.
Yes.
And we saw this repeated at the most recent primaries. Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, the Clintons, the media, big business, they've all acted in concert to destroy the only real politician who's had the interests of working class Americans at heart, and whose policies, had they become a reality, would have made a big difference to working class Americans' lives and made a positive difference.
Yes.
Everyone else, it seems to me,
and this has been going, and this happened as well in 2016. And I think we should probably do an actual full episode on the 2016 presidential election.
Yeah, because it's worth
during
going back to.
During the primaries, when all the states were declaring their candidates, a large number of states actually declared for, actually had been won by Bernie Sanders. West Virginia is the best example here, because all 13 counties voted for Bernie overwhelmingly, and yet the state delegates decided to go against that entirely and declare for Hillary. And this happened as well in Vermont, which is Bernie's home state. So, not winning your home state, fuck off. I mean, we're not talking Walter Mondale here.
I mean, but we're now living in the post-Corbyn, post-Sanders era. Those movements, through a combination, and yes, both movements made mistakes. I don't think even you and me, as ardent supporters of both of them, would say mistakes.
Well, we've already said we've already picked apart a few things that we think were wrong with Jeremy. I think Bernie probably needs his own episode. Focus.
But there's no denying that those. If Corbyn and Sanders had come to power, they would have made an enormous difference, and actually, they would have actually put into reverse the gigantic move towards the right that we've seen for 40 years. But what's significant is, with the collapse of those movements, we've almost reached a point where there's no political hope.
No.
They basically said, the establishment has said, we would rather have Trump than Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn. And despite what establishment politicians say, they are very comfortable with Donald Trump. If they didn't, they would have got behind Bernie Sanders in the same way that everyone in the kind of idiot People's Vote movement, if they were actually really hacked off with the Tory party, they would have supported Jeremy Corbyn and he would have been Prime Minister by now. That's what you would do if you were actually pissed off with the government. I think this George Floyd murder, it's almost as if it's occurred for the first... This event has occurred in a gigantic political vacuum where there's no hope and there's no faith in elected democratic processes anymore. The people who are actually our elected representatives, the Nancy Pelosi's, of this world, they've basically proven they will never allow a political candidate to be elected to office who will represent you and me. They've said, we're going to queer the pitch every single time it looks like we actually might have a government which is interested in serving the people rather than the market. And that's the political vacuum which the George Floyd murder has emerged, on top of everything else that this,
and especially the coronavirus thing. I think basically on
top of not only coronavirus but also on top of Black Lives Matter, on top of police brutality, on top of institutional racism, on top of all of these things.
Absolutely.
And it's almost as if that loss of political hope has just been that little bit extra thing to make this explode.
No, I agree. It's been, it's been brewing as a powder keg certainly in America. I mean, they're in excess of 100,000 deaths now. We're at a mere paltry just under 40,000. But realistically, I think basically everyone has just snapped. The straw that broke the camel's back. And people are now venting their frustrations. And it's coming out in some horrific ways. I mean, again, as I said at the top of the episode, I don't condone violence.
Well, I don't condone violence, but to be honest, Fred,
I can understand why people do it, why people engage in it, and why they think that that's the only way of getting your voice heard.
I always used to think I was in favour of peaceful protest, but now I'm thinking I might be changing my mind actually now, because I look at the last 5 years in this country, the last 5 years in America, and I do think to myself, elected politicians. If you set the idea that peaceful protest is a part of democracy, a part of elected politicians, and elected politicians had their chance and they blew it. So how on earth do you expect people to engage in politics if you've already made it clear you're not interested in changing things? And this is where all the kind of rioting is coming from. It's not an organised political movement, but as Martin Luther King said, it's the language of the unheard.
I think I don't think there's any particular sort of, there's certainly no organisation behind it, but I think what there is I think it's very guttural, very kind of animalistic in the way that it's being outlet. Just that kind of, when you see it in a movie, when someone, when the hero's girl is killed by the baddie, and they have that kind of no moment. That's kind of what's happening now. Where they're having their no moment.
I mean, I think,
and as they should, they're totally entitled to do so.
I mean, it's it stitches together everything we've talked about, and the other thing, of course, we haven't talked about much because it's slightly too big. But on top of everything else that the George Floyd murder has happened, it's also happened on, the decline, the long-term decline of the United States of America as a world power, but that's it. I mean, it's very scary. It's almost as if America's entered a pre-revolutionary state. It looks similar. I mean, they're similar. It's all weird echoes of like Russia in 1905 or something. A declining political class, a starving people, an oppressed people, a political centre, an establishment which is absolutely refusing to change, and that's the thing which is actually accelerating the decline of politics in this country. And this one, paradoxically, it's the elected politicians are bringing about their own destruction, because they're by not actually willing to even budge accept a little bit of socialism or social democracy. The anger gets worse and worse and worse.
And extending the comparison with Russia, pre-revolutionary Russia, would be also they had in the 1880s they had the pogroms, which is I don't know exactly what the exact translation of the word pogrom is, but it's now become sort of the accepted term for persecution of a people.
It's actually anti-Semitic.
In this case, it was anti-Semitic. Yes,
it's associated most strongly with the persecution of Jewish people.
A lot of Russian Jews and Polish Jews as well fled, and a lot of them actually came to London in the 1880s, and there was obviously a mistrust of that of a people who were made to be a target, and we are seeing this. We've seen it in America, where Trump is certainly was and probably still is making the enemy out to be undocumented immigrants and Mexico, and in general, and these sorts of just creating this awful kind of hostile environment. And then we've had our hostile environments over here, where everyone everyone who's sort of red-faced and ruddy-cheeked, basically gammons is what I'm saying here, hates dem immigrants, and that it's all being made out to be this figure of hate, which actually just is a classic deflection tactic. And that's what the ruling class of the Western world has been very good at for many, many years now. Is the concept of divide and rule. There'll be people like Boris and his fat cat friends, hoarding all of this wealth. But then telling the working class that actually, it's Vladimir, the Polish plumber, that's taking all your money, and making the country into a shithole. You don't even need to scratch the surface to see that the narrative doesn't hold water. And yet, far too many people believe it because Brexit. They made Brexit out to be the target. That they were some sort of evil ghoul that was writing these punitive laws that we had to follow about how bendy a banana can be. Which is bollocks.
It's completely.
And one of the lie stories that Boris wrote. Was it the Times he was a columnist for?
Yeah, he was. Telegraph, actually, beg your pardon. I think Max Hastings. I think Max Hastings was his editor.
Oh, that was it. Yes, that's right.
Max Hastings has some interesting things to say about Boris Johnson.
He saw that he was a complete fucker.
But no, that's interesting. Every single person Boris Johnson has ever worked for, thinks he's a complete lazy tosser. And and just a complete charlatan.
And he's proving it. The evidence is bearing out. But one of the big lies that he wrote in one of his columns was that the EU were going to ban the prawn cocktail crisp. What? They don't care. They don't care that we eat prawn cocktail crisps. They probably look at it and go, "Oof, who the hell would eat that?" But then again, the British cuisine isn't exactly known for its quality and diversity, is it?
I mean, And so but it's a very, very bleak time. But the other thing I'd like to just briefly mention,
Yes.
in light of everything with the race riots in America is, if you're young and black and you've lived through the 2008 financial crisis, and you've lived through politics of the last 10 or 15 years, and you've everything like that. You're looking at politics in America today, and you've seen the choices on offer.
Yeah, that's the thing. You've got you've got Joe Biden.
Yes,
pretty much.
I just want to put on.
Yeah.
You see Donald Trump, who's an admitted racist. I mean, he called terrible things about Mexicans, and you've got Joe Biden. Is it any wonder you're pissed off? Because do you know, Joe Biden dragged his feet about segregation for a long time, desegregation.
Is that school desegregation? Or...
Okay, so
are we talking Jim Crow laws here?
So, Joe Biden has been around politics for a very long time. He's one of the oldest serving U.S. senators alive. Yeah, so he was elected at some ridiculously early age, and about 28 or something, 25, for the state of Delaware, which is this really tiny state next to New Jersey.
Yeah,
and he's now in his late 70s. So he's been out in the US Senate for nearly 50 years. And obviously, as a young senator, he was elected 1970, I think. There were obviously, the politics of the 1960s were very, very fresh.
Yes.
And so, as a support, many of the people he worked with were segregationists, segregationist Democrats and Republicans. And so, just reading this has obviously come to light in light of the fact that, if the Democratic Party are going to win the election in November, they're going to have to win the votes of black Americans.
They are.
To win.
I think, realistically, we're... 2020 election is going to be basically a rerun of 2016, in so much as you've got this absolute shithouse on one side, who says some absolutely outrageous things, but the alternative is someone who's really not that great either.
I'm just going to read to you this little article, and it demonstrates so perfectly race in America, and this is why I would be pissed off with the politics in America if I were young and black in America.
Okay.
This is from a CNN article. Joe Biden's road to a third presidential bid has been lined with a series of explanations and apologies, illustrating the blah 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 blah, and what it says. He rarely discusses one of the earliest and most controversials he championed in the Senate, his fight against busing to desegregate schools. So busing, if people doesn't know, was a policy in late 60s America where, I think, wasn't it, it was a policy which, where white children would be bused into black
into predominantly black communities.
Yeah, so it was a way of desegregating the education system in America.
Yeah, it's almost like have a field trip to a predominantly black school and see how they live.
Biden opposed this policy, and in doing so, in opposing busing, he sought support from the Senate's most fervent segregationists. So it says, Biden, who at the time was 34, serving his first term in the Senate, repeatedly asked for and received the support of Senator James Eastland, a Mississippi Democrat and chairman of the Judiciary Committee and a leading symbol of Southern resistance to desegregation. Eastland frequently spoke of blacks as, quote, an inferior race. Dear Chairman, Biden wrote on June 30 in a letter to James Eastman on June 30th, 1977. I want you to know that I very much appreciate your help during this week's committee meeting in attempting to bring my anti-busing legislation to a vote. Now, this is Biden going around asking for the support of racist white segregationists.
It'd be interesting then.
This is the man who the Democratic establishment have chosen to offer the American people in 2020, and they're asking young black voters, or old black voters even, to loyally go into the voting booth and vote for a man who has who in his career has sought the support of segregationists.
And yet he served
Donald
as VP
Trump.
under a black president. How do you square that circle?
This is kind of, it is a kind of madness. And, you're young, you're black, you're looking at the police, you're looking at politics in America, and I can't blame them for being angry with politics as usual. If these are the shit candidates they're going to on offer.
Well, if I may, if I may quote South Park.
Yeah.
Every election always just comes down between a giant douche and a turd sandwich.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened in 2016.
Yeah.
It's exactly what will happen in 2020 and 2024, etc. ad infinitum.
But what I think will happen is, I think we have reached a turning point with politics. I think traditionally people were, when they were presented with the lesser of two evils, they were willing to vote for the lesser of two evils. I think that's changing. I don't think people will anymore. I'm not. I mean, I'm not going to lift a finger to help Keir Starmer get elected. And it wouldn't surprise me. A lot of Americans were thinking the same way. You know what? We've lived with this lesser of two evils argument for so long.
And Biden himself, he's a bit. Obviously you've just come up with this that obviously is news to me, but I've noticed he's a very touchy-feely kind of guy, isn't he?
Yeah.
Every time you picture him with, or you see a picture of him and there is a female, regardless of age, he's always got his hands on her somewhere.
This is even worse, actually.
And a few people have said that He is a bit
handsy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a good, safe way of putting it. Now that doesn't mean to say that he's, But then again, this
one day
there was that woman who came out and said that he'd sexually assaulted her years and years ago.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't surprise me actually. Just to take it back to the issue I raised earlier.
Yes.
I'm just reading this from Washington Examiner. Joe Biden, weighing a 2020 White House bid, once advocated to continued school segregation in the United States, arguing that it benefited minorities and that integration would prevent black people from, quote, embracing their own identity. Now that's quite a damning quote.
That is a damning quote.
But and
the thing is, the black vote in America should never be discounted.
Yeah, of course. The reality is, if you want to remove Donald Trump as president, there's no way a Democratic candidate can win an election without getting the black vote. No. It's just impossible. But on the issue of sexual assault and Joe Biden, I have no idea whether the woman in question is telling the truth, but all I know is it wouldn't surprise me, because nothing does surprise me about leading politicians anymore. And also, on a different episode, we will talk about Bill Clinton's history with women. Now,
yes.
I don't know if you've read a book called... I
would just like to point out that these days Monica Lewinsky is still hot.
Well, okay. I have no idea what Monica Lewinsky looks like these days.
You should totally Google her. She is still very fine.
Well, I don't know if you read a book called No One Left to Lie To by Christopher Hitchens.
No, but, go on.
In this book, Christopher Hitchens makes a good argument that Bill Clinton is plausibly guilty of sexual assault. And I haven't had the time to go into it now, but we might go into it in another episode. I've read it. Looks quite plausible to me. But mind you, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, they're of similar generations, They're
pretty about the same age, weren't they?
I think they're roughly the same age, Biden has also been a powerful man for a very long time. It doesn't surprise me. But anyway, so that's that. But that's the offer to which America has come up with, And,
Considering the population of America, although it is obviously that population number has taken a bit of a hit recently thanks to COVID-19, but the two people that have risen, and bear in mind, anyone in America who is sufficiently of good financial means and is American by birth can run for president.
Yeah.
You know, anyone can. So, and if this is the best they can do,
yeah.
You know, at least in our last election, we did actually have an alternative on the table.
Yeah.
You know, whether people, you know, and this is actually a little bit of a tangent, but it's interesting how, you know, when people are just another Labour loser, L symbol, you know, loser.
Well,
but then it's like, well, no, because firstly, A, we've all lost, and B, I'm not the one that got duped by a fucking clown.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you voted for Boris Johnson on that basis, more fool you.
Yeah.
Because
you got fucking fooled.
And also, you are a fool. I mean, you've been taken for a ride and you don't even know it. But the other thing is, if Jeremy Corbyn, if the Labour Party is so awful, why did the Conservative government need our policies?
Yeah.
If you look at the only good bits of the Tory government are actually the bits that the Labour Party came up with, like furlough, for example.
Literally carbon copying what we say.
When they do that, I mean, do you know in 2019? No, it was 2017. I remember the Tory Party had a promise to implement an energy price freeze, which they mocked when Ed Miliband came up with it.
Yes.
You know, if we're that awful, why does the Tory Party need our policies? It's the only good or memorable bit of the government. The rest is just bigotry and libertarian.
There's any good or memorable bit of the Ed Miliband tenure as well.
But they do. They steal all our policies, and you know, who knows? Maybe they'll even steal British broadband at some point in the future.
Yeah, they'll repackage it.
They'll repackage it, but it'll be basically the same. You know, if we're that bad, why do you need our policies? Where's all the Tory party? They're wonderful. I mean, you know, but
Yeah. So you were going to tie in with the Dominic.
Yeah. So basically, what I meant to say is, what I said earlier about the context in which George Floyd happens is, leaving the fact that we both have governments in America and Britain, which are slightly too comfortable with a kind of Darwinian ideas about the world. I mean, it's not get all the way there, but it's slightly too warm to these ideas. We also have governments which government in Britain and America increasingly looks to Silicon Valley as the model of an undemocratic, unaccountable, efficient, technocratic way of governing, and it seems to me to make what governments in Britain and America and this move to the right, what it wants to do is to replace democracy in both our countries with some kind of permanent undemocratic technocracy, just a technocracy that will be in place all the time without elections. And this is why I mentioned Dominic Cummings, because he's not a member of the Conservative Party. What he wants to do is to gain British democracy and reduce it to basically abolish democratic processes in this country completely and replace it with government run by scientists, technocrats and administrators and project managers, and a government administered by two versions of conservatism. And you know, and that process is kind of being replicated in the United States of America, in the fact that Silicon Valley is held up so much as a kind of great big city on a hill to which politics must look to, and the fact that, you know, the Democratic Party in America has made it utterly clear that it's not interested in doing anything remotely in the public. But that's kind of like the context into which George Floyd's murder has emerged on, and it's just one of the things which I think is contributing that sense of hopelessness and that kind of collapse of any kind of hope and optimism that things may get better, or that we may possibly have a government in the future which will prioritise people and not market forces. That's contributed to the kind of rising sense of anger and desperation in people.
And it's worth pointing out as well that where poverty reigns, desperation also reigns. And when one is desperate, one will take extreme measures in order to survive. And I want to be very careful how I say this, but poverty and desperation are more prevalent in the African American community. Just simply because, and it's not, this isn't a slight on them, it's a slight on the system that creates that situation. I just want to make that perfectly clear. You know, I do not blame black people for their lot.
Well,
you know, the system is geared to fuck them. And everyone, but of course they do feel it more.
Well, it's
not to detract from anyone else's experience, but you know, that is pretty much what happens, and the system's geared to fuck everyone who isn't rich. And who has no prospects. It basically crushes hope. And I can understand where the frustration comes from, and where the anger and need to vent this in a guttural fashion. You know, I don't, as I said, you know, I don't condone violence, but I understand it. I understand why. You know, but if you want things to change, you've got to do it with the ballot box. You know, not the Armalite. This is what happened in Northern Ireland. Okay, that was literally their policy. The IRA's policy, the IRA plus Sinn Féin, was the ballot box and the Armalite. The Armalite, of course, being a brand of assault weapon. And the thing is, it was the ballot box that won, and gave us a lasting, workable peace.
I mean, I think the only hope that I have, I mean, hope is the wrong word. Hope is not the word I want to use in this
Aspiration?
context. What? I mean, one of the effects of coronavirus may be to completely reset everything.
Now, we've mentioned this previously.
So, if coronavirus engenders a complete reset of politics, the economy, everything,
I don't see how it couldn't.
It may be possible that it may open the door to something different happening, and
it will go some way to improve the lot. Of the lowly amongst us.
But it's not a way of doing it which I have any warm feelings about, because the human cost of coronavirus, if there is a deadly second wave, will be monstrous and enormous. But equally, there's the chance it could lead to a complete reset. I mean, you can see the fact that, you know, don't take our word for it, the capitalists are afraid of it. It's one of the reasons they're absolutely hating furlough at the moment, because they fear the collapse of their businesses and things.
Absolutely.
So,
but the furlough scheme does prove one thing. Is that UBI fucking works.
Yeah, it does completely.
Universal basic income.
Well, that's it. Universal basic income. I mean, at the moment, we're sort of halfway to a universal basic income anyway.
We are.
If the government's paying people in the private sector their wages and they're not working, we're effectively halfway there already. And so
up to $2,500, I think, is 80% of wages up to $2,500. And that's incredible. You know, I'd love $2,500 a month, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'd love $2,500.
Yeah, but you know what? I would carry on working. Because I want more. And that's what and that's what people don't seem to realise. The people in power don't seem to realise, who are against UBI, is that the thing is, we are a consumerist society. You know,
I mean, if people,
there's no such thing as too much money.
I mean, well,
no, realistically, think about it, because we're always looking for the next big thing. We're always looking for the next job that's going to net us more money.
I think,
so we can buy more shit.
I think
and give Jeff Bezos a big fucking, financial hard on.
Yeah, I think there's a if UBI was used correctly, it would be effectively grease a lot of people's wheels to find better, bigger, more challenging work.
Absolutely.
And they would spend more for one thing.
Yeah, they would, absolutely. It would stimulate the economy,
but
no end.
But the downside, from the point of view of capital, is that effectively it transfers power from employers to the employees. Because if you've got a basic income of 2,500 and you don't like your job, you can effectively take time out of the workplace to find other work, and you're not going to have to worry about penury, for example.
Yeah, I've been trapped in jobs that I absolutely fucking hated.
Yeah.
Mostly, and this is interesting as well. Mostly because of shit bosses.
Yeah.
Of bosses who, 1 week you'll have plenty of hours. It'll be nice and comfortable, like 0 hours contracts we're talking here. But then, if you have and I've been here, I had to have 1 day off sick because I was suffering with migraines, and the next week, my hours were completely decimated.
Yeah.
And I had maybe 2 or 3 shifts.
I think,
and the fact that they can do that, and you've got fuck all recourse.
Yeah, and so under UBI you can kiss goodbye to 0 hours contracts.
Yeah.
You can kiss goodbye to temporary work.
Yeah.
You can kiss goodbye to short-term contracts. No one will put up with the bullshit jobs that capitalism throws up anymore, because you won't have to.
However, the one thing my cynical and skeptical mind sees as a problem is that, because now, in a hypothetical situation where people are paid, let's say it is $2,000 a month. Let's say it probably wouldn't be anywhere near that. Probably be not even half that. But anyway, let's say they are paid $2,000 a month. What do you think private landlords are going to do to rent?
Jack it up.
Abso-fucking-lutely. And they'll jack it up to about 1,999.
Yeah. So you'd have to do it. You'd have to influence UBI along with
rent controls.
Yeah.
And rent controls.
So you got to wonder. So in 2017, the Labour Party were going to introduce rent caps. That was one of our manifesto's policy. We also said we'd experiment with the UBI. Mm-hmm. We'd pilot it. We'd see if it was we could practically do it. Mm-hmm. And people wonder, why the establishment hate the Labour Party, hate Jeremy Corbyn. Of course they do, because they don't want their power threatened.
No.
And
that's what this boils down to entirely. Yeah, because all of a sudden, shit bosses can't hold their employees over a barrel.
Yeah.
And make them reliant.
Yeah.
It's almost like the really awful days of employment where you weren't actually paid in money.
Yeah.
You were paid in credits that you could only redeem at the company store.
Yeah.
So basically, the money just goes straight back into the company. It never leaves the company.
Yeah.
And that's, if they could get away with it, they absolutely fucking would.
Yeah, they would.
Today.
Of course they would, yeah.
There's so many, draconian measures that we as a people have fought against and won. And won our individual small victories. I think it's time for. I honestly think it's time for more. I think if dramatic change does not or is not forthcoming post COVID-19, that a general strike.
Yeah, that would be, with the collapse of the Corbyn movement. I'm thinking, you look at coronavirus, and it does show you there's the space that could be opened by a general strike.
Mm-hmm.
A general strike. Yeah, I agree. I'd go out on general strike.
I would.
I am not going to lift a finger to help the capital class or the politics class.
No.
And I mean, these people are the people who run our lives would want you to go back into potentially coronavirus infested workplaces because
or schools. Yes.
Because they would rather you do that than them lose money, and on top of the extraordinary wealth they already have. That's who is.
And really the only and let's be honest here, the only reason it's nothing to do with potential of stifling a child's educational development. This idea of reopening schools is purely to get the kids off of the parents' hands, so the parents are forced back to work.
Yeah, that's all it is.
That's what this is. That's what this fucking boils down to.
That's all it is.
It has got fuck all to do with lost education time.
Yeah.
And don't let them fucking try and tell you that it's anything else.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
This is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
You're being manipulated at every stage of the game. There is never a moment where you are not being fucked.
Yeah. I think
the establishment will always have that over us.
Yeah.
Until we have enough.
Yeah.
I think the last time that happened majorly was Russia. To a major power.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of my. I think there's we should wrap up soon because I can.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to wrap up.
I'm feeling it now, but no, it's a very it's an interesting times, But as I say before, we've kind of moved from Dominic Cummings to politics in general, but Dominic Cummings is one of the reasons that politics is so fucked at the moment. It's funny, and basically we have to.
He is the embodiment of everything at the moment that is wrong with British politics.
I mean, you can say that the Dominic Cummings issue is a Westminster bubble issue, but as you say, when Dominic Cummings embodies everything that is wrong with politics at the moment, and embodies everything that's wrong with the direction that politics is taking in Britain and America, and we're seeing the long-term effects of this this move towards undemocratic, authoritarian, right-wing politics. Right-wing politics plus libertarian nonsense, free market nonsense plus bigotry. If it's going to lead to episodes like that in America, and if the enormous inequality that we're experiencing in Britain and America is going to contribute to episodes like that in America,
well, if there ever is a point, and I actually hope it doesn't get to this point, but if there ever is a time when there is armed insurrection in Britain, one redeeming factor.
Well, actually, no, this has just come back to me. You wouldn't be a bad man to have in an armed insurrection, would you?
Well, I do have an extensive knowledge of firearms, yes.
So for those of you that don't know, Fred told me something a little while ago. He is one of his many other hobbies he has. He's actually quite a passionate gun owner. Sorry.
I am a British gun nut.
Yeah, he's a responsible gun owner, I should say.
Yes, I am.
He doesn't break the law with it, and they're fully licensed and everything.
Yes, I don't carry. Don't do what people have been seen doing and going into Macca's with a fucking assault rifle strapped to me. Mostly because assault rifles are illegal in this country, and secondly because you cannot do that full stop. Because that's a fucking responsible way of doing it.
So you've already got a private arsenal ready for when we have to hunt down the when we have to defend ourselves against
the zombie apocalypse.
The zombie apocalypse or the fascists. When we have to inhabit some mountainous terrain and defend ourselves as the last groups of civilization.
Like Enemy at the Gates.
I like you there with all your guns.
I might have to start increasing my ammunition allowance on my license, just in case.
Should we wrap up there?
I think we should wrap up. Okay, so thank you for listening to our ramblings.
Yeah.
We certainly hope that we have given you at least some food for thought. And I think it would be best and respectful if we sign off with our deepest sympathies to the family of George Floyd. And we hope that justice is served in the inevitable case that comes up. And that will of course not make up for your loss, but it will at least provide some closure and some sense of some sense of justice, because Lord knows faith in justice has been heavily eroded with what has happened, and it needs to have something redeeming about it. But anyway, so rest in peace, George Floyd, and there's nothing more to say on that really, is there?
Okay.
So
on that note, I think that's the programme. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, and like and subscribe for more content very soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.